The airport gate was crowded with the usual chorus of rolling suitcases, boarding announcements, and impatient sighs. Business travelers tapped at laptops, families wrangled restless children, and phones buzzed with last-minute messages before takeoff. In the middle of the bustle sat a man in his 40s, tall, composed, dressed neatly in a dark blazer and slacks. A small roller bag rested at his side. He sat calmly, checking his watch, then glancing at the departure screen with quiet focus. Karen spotted him from across the gate area. Her lips pursed, her eyes narrowing as she whispered to her companion, "He doesn't belong up here? Look at him, just sitting there, like he owns the place." Her irritation grew the longer she watched. Finally, unable to contain herself, she marched across the waiting area and stopped directly in front of him. "Excuse me," she said loudly, her voice sharp enough to draw nearby attention. "This is the boarding area for first class. You can't just sit here." The man looked up slowly, his expression calm, unreadable. "I'm exactly where I need to be," he said evenly. Karen let out a short, incredulous laugh. "Don't lie. I know when someone doesn't belong. People pay good money for these seats, and you—" She cut herself off, but the venom in her tone filled in the blanks. Around them, conversations quieted. A businessman lowered his newspaper. A young couple exchanged uneasy glances. The air shifted, tension creeping in like a storm cloud. The man didn't raise his voice, he didn't flinch. "I have a right to be here," he replied simply, returning his gaze to the screen as if her words carried no weight. But Karen stepped closer, her voice rising. "Not for long, you don't. If you don't move, I'll call security myself." Gasps rippled through the gate area. Phones were already being lifted discreetly, recording. And though the man sat calmly, his eyes steady, it was clear to anyone watching that this was about to become much more than a passenger complaint. Karen spun on her heels clicking across the polished floor as she marched straight to the gate agent's podium. The woman behind the counter looked up from scanning a boarding pass, her professional smile faltering as Karen leaned forward, voice already carrying. "You need to do something about him," Karen demanded, pointing back toward the man seated calmly by the window. "He doesn't belong here. He's loitering in the first-class section, pretending he has a ticket. I don't feel safe with him here." The gate agent blinked, taken aback. "Ma'am, everyone in this area is waiting for the same flight. If he has a boarding pass, then—" Karen cut her off, her voice rising louder. "Don't make excuses. I'm telling you, people like him sneak into these areas all the time. I've been flying for years. I know who belongs here and who doesn't." Travelers nearby turned to listen, their faces shifting from curiosity to unease. A few raised their phones higher, recording the scene. A father with 2 kids muttered, "This is going to end up online." The man by the window hadn't moved. He sat straight-backed, watching calmly as Karen's tirade spread across the gate area like spilled fuel. He checked his watch again, the faintest sigh leaving his lips, as though none of this was surprising. Karen slapped her hand on the counter. "Call security. Right now." Before this gets worse, the gate agent's eyes flickered with hesitation. Protocol demanded calm, but Karen's voice was sharp, commanding, impossible to ignore. "Ma'am," she said finally, "please lower your voice. This is an airport. We can't—" "I will not lower my voice," Karen snapped, her face red, eyes flashing. She jabbed her finger toward the man again. "If you don't call them, I will." "He has no right to be here." The gate agent exhaled, defeated. She picked up the phone and murmured quietly into it, requesting security assistance at the gate. Karen folded her arms, triumphant, glaring at the man across the seating area as if she had already won. But the looks from the other passengers told a different story. They weren't nodding in agreement. They weren't applauding her vigilance. They were staring at her, some with disgust, others with disbelief, wondering how long she could keep digging the hole she didn't yet know she was in. It didn't take long. Within minutes, 2 airport security officers appeared at the gate, their reflective vests catching the overhead lights as they moved through the crowd. The atmosphere shifted again, whispers swelling, phones angled higher, every traveler sensing a confrontation about to boil over. Karen waved them down eagerly. "Over here." "That's him," she said, pointing an accusatory finger toward the man seated near the window. "He's been harassing the gate, trying to sit in first class when he clearly doesn't belong. I told you, I don't feel safe. The man looked up as the officers approached. His face remained calm, his posture composed, as if this were nothing more than a minor inconvenience. He stood slowly, meeting them eye to eye, his voice steady. Officers, is there a problem? Karen jumped in before they could speak. The problem is you. You don't have a ticket for this area. You're trying to scam your way into first class. Tell them the truth. One of the officers raised a hand. Ma'am, let us handle this. Then he turned to the man. Sir, could we see your boarding pass, please? Without hesitation, the man reached into his jacket and pulled out a sleek leather wallet. From it, he produced a boarding pass and handed it over. The officer scanned it carefully, his brows lifting slightly. First class, seat 1A, he said after a pause. Looks legitimate. Karen scoffed, her face flushing. Oh, please. Anyone can fake one of those. You can print them at home. Check again. There's no way he has that seat. The second officer frowned, exchanging a glance with his partner. Around them, passengers began to murmur more audibly now. Not about the man, but about Karen. Words like ridiculous and racist floated through the air. Still, the man said nothing. He slipped his hands into his pockets, checked his watch again, and gave the faintest shake of his head, as if this entire charade were eating up time he didn't care to waste. Ma'am, the first officer said firmly, his ticket is valid. He has every right to be here. But Karen wasn't done. Her voice rose again, echoing across the gate. I'm telling you, I won't board this plane if he's on it. I don't feel safe flying with him. You need to remove him, for everyone's protection. Gasps spread through the crowd. The officers stiffened, caught between calming the situation and the sheer audacity of her words. The man, however, didn't flinch. He simply adjusted his blazer, picked up his roller bag, and waited. His silence spoke louder than her shouts. And though Karen couldn't see it yet, she was moments away from her greatest humiliation. The gate had gone from ordinary airport chaos to theater, every passenger now an unwilling audience. Phones were lifted higher, recording every word, every expression. Karen, flushed with self-righteous fury, mistook the silence for support. I'm telling you, she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, I will not step foot on that plane if he's allowed to board. I refuse to put my life in danger. The first security officer rubbed his temple, exasperated. Ma'am, he hasn't done anything wrong. He has a valid first-class ticket. Karen cut him off, her tone shrill. Don't you dare dismiss me. You don't know what people like him are capable of. I'm protecting everyone here. A wave of discomfort spread through the crowd. A mother pulled her child closer. A businessman shook his head in disbelief. From the corner, someone muttered, protecting us from what? Sitting quietly? Laughter bubbled nervously, but it only fueled Karen's anger. She jabbed her finger toward the man again. If he boards, I'm filing a complaint with the airline. I will not be trapped in the air with someone I don't trust. The man still hadn't spoken. He stood tall, his face calm, almost detached, as if he'd seen this scene play out too many times before. He checked his watch once more, then slid his boarding pass back into his wallet with deliberate care. Boarding will begin shortly, the gate agent announced over the intercom, her voice tight, her eyes flashing irritation in Karen's direction. Karen turned on her. You can't just let him on. This is outrageous. I demand you stop him. He's a threat to this flight, and I... Her words faltered as the man finally moved. Slowly, purposefully, he bent down, unzipped his roller bag, and pulled something out. A navy blue cap, its golden insignia gleaming under the fluorescent lights. The crowd inhaled sharply. Karen's rant trailed into silence. The two officers exchanged quick, startled glances. The man dusted off the brim of the cap, then placed it firmly on his head. The uniform piece completed the picture in an instant. He wasn't just a first-class passenger. He was the pilot. And as the realization rippled through the gate, the storm of Karen's accusations was about to collapse in on itself. The gate area froze, as though someone had hit pause. The man straightened, the navy blue pilot's cap now perfectly aligned above his steady eyes. The golden insignia glimmered under the harsh airport lights, unmistakable in its authority. Karen's mouth opened, but no words came out. Her face drained of color as the whispers around her swelled into a wave. He's the pilot. Oh my God. She called security on the pilot. The two security officers stepped back, suddenly stiff and awkward, as though they'd been caught scolding their own superior. Even the gate agent, who had been biting her tongue through the entire ordeal, let out the faintest sigh of relief, her lips twitching into the shadow of a smile. The man didn't address Karen. He didn't address the crowd. Instead, he simply lifted his roller bag, adjusted his blazer, and walked calmly past the stunned semicircle of travelers. His stride was measured, unhurried, filled with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need to be spoken aloud. Karen staggered forward a step, her voice trembling now. Wait, he can't be. But the truth was written plainly in every detail. The cap, the composure, the authority that radiated from him as naturally as breathing. When the boarding announcement rang out, Flight 227 to Atlanta now boarding, the man didn't join the line of passengers. Instead, he moved toward the side of the jet bridge, scanning his ID badge and nodding briefly to the gate agent. She returned the nod with open respect. The crowd parted silently as he passed, and then, with a push of the door and a final glance at his watch, he disappeared down the jet bridge, not as a passenger, but as the man responsible for flying them safely through the sky. Gasps turned to murmurs, murmurs into low chuckles of disbelief. Someone whispered, "She tried to keep the pilot off his own plane." Another muttered, "That's going viral tonight." Karen stood frozen, her defiance shattered, her voice caught in her throat, because the man she had tried so hard to keep out was the one every single passenger was about to trust with their lives. The gate area erupted in murmurs, disbelief rolling through the waiting passengers like a breaking wave. He's the pilot. She really called security on him. Unbelievable. Phones, once angled discreetly, were now openly raised, recording Karen's every twitch of panic. She tried to straighten her posture, to salvage the authority she'd carried minutes ago, but her voice wavered as she stammered, I didn't know. How was I supposed to? A woman near the front cut her off sharply. You didn't ask. You just assumed. A ripple of agreement spread. Some passengers shook their heads in disgust. Others outright glared. The father with two kids from earlier pulled them a little closer, whispering something that made the boy glance up at Karen with open scorn. The security officers shifted awkwardly, clearly wishing they were anywhere else. One muttered, "Ma'am, maybe it's best you take a seat and stop drawing attention." Karen's cheeks burned crimson. She sank back into a chair, clutching her handbag like a shield. For once, she had no audience to rally, only a terminal full of strangers united by her humiliation. At the podium, the gate agent's voice took on a crisp edge as she resumed boarding announcements. But her eyes flicked to Karen with open disdain, her tone heavy with unspoken judgment. You caused this. Meanwhile, down the jet bridge, the pilot's figure had already vanished into the cockpit. The very space Karen had tried to keep him from was the one place only he had the authority to command. And that knowledge spread through the crowd like wildfire. A collective recognition that her prejudice hadn't just been cruel. It had been absurd. For the rest of them, it would become a story to tell later, shaking their heads at the sheer audacity. For Karen, it was the beginning of a silence, heavier than any scolding could ever be. The last of the passengers filed down the jet bridge, their chatter subdued, their eyes flicking toward Karen as they passed. Some shook their heads, others smirked knowingly. Karen shrank into her seat, clutching her phone but too ashamed to lift it. The glow of recording screens around her promised that this moment would not disappear quietly. A few minutes later, the cabin doors closed, and the familiar crackle of the public address system filled the terminal. The crowd waiting for the next flight lifted their heads instinctively. "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen," came the steady, confident voice. "This is Captain Jonathan Hayes. On behalf of the crew, welcome aboard. We're expecting clear skies tonight, and I'll be guiding you safely to Atlanta." The voice was unmistakable, calm, commanding, tinged with warmth. It was the same man Karen had tried to cast out, now addressing hundreds of passengers as their captain. The terminal went utterly still. For the first time, even Karen didn't move. Her face paled as the truth echoed not just through the room, but through the intercoms and across every listening ear. Some passengers exchanged small, satisfied smiles. One whispered, "Poetic justice." Another said, "That's the safest I've ever felt on a flight." Karen lowered her gaze, wishing she could vanish into the floor. Her protests, her accusations, all of them had collapsed in the shadow of his voice. Meanwhile, inside the cockpit, Captain Hayes adjusted the controls with practiced ease. He wasn't thinking about Karen anymore. He wasn't thinking about the humiliation she'd tried to inflict. His focus was where it had always been, on flying the plane, on protecting the lives in his care. Respect, after all, wasn't something he demanded. It was something he carried with him, in his composure, in his professionalism, and in the quiet authority that no prejudice could take away. And at 30,000 feet, there was no mistaking who belonged in command.